All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Faith at Home for this week. We're going to be reading from our Spark Story Bible. So if you have that at home and you want to grab yours and follow along, we're going to be reading a story called The Plagues on page 78. So we'll start there before we jump into our core camp and our activity for this week. So we have this story, The Plagues. God gave Moses a big job. Moses had to stand up to a very stubborn king who was making God's people work as slaves. God told Moses to go to the Pharaoh and say, "Let my people go." But Pharaoh said, "No, I will not let God's people go." Pharaoh wanted the people to worship him, not God. So God used 10 ways, called plagues, to change Pharaoh's mind. God turned the Nile to blood. The river began to stink. Pharaoh watched the river turn red, knew his people could not drink, and still Pharaoh said no. God sent frogs to hop everywhere, even into the beds. Pharaoh heard his bakers scream when frogs jumped out of their breads, and Pharaoh still said no. God thought gnats might change Pharaoh's mind, so the people could go free. Gnats swarmed people, goats, and cows. There was no place to flee, and still Pharaoh said no. Flies thought God will do the trick, and so God sent a zillion. Pharaoh's house filled up with flies. Outside there were a million, and Pharaoh still said no. God now struck down Pharaoh's herds. The camels all were ill. The donkeys, horses all got sick. His cows fell down, but still. And Pharaoh still said no. Ooey gooey, icky sores on everybody's skin. God knocked and knocked on Pharaoh's heart. Pharaoh never let God in. And Pharaoh still said no. Hail pounded, thunder crashed. Pharaoh's plants laid down. Not a tree stood anywhere. All were on the ground. And Pharaoh still said no. "Let my people go," said God, "or I will send a swarm of locusts to devour what's left, to do your land more harm." And Pharaoh still said no. Now darkness covered Pharaoh's land. The sun did not appear. No one could move, no one could see. Still Pharaoh would not hear. And Pharaoh still said no. The last and saddest plague of all brought sobs throughout the lands. Parents cried as their children died. Finally, Pharaoh changed his plans. Pharaoh let God's people go. And the question to think about says, what plague would you least like to have come to you and your family? Why? So in our story, we have 10 plagues, all of the things that God sent to Pharaoh to help to change his mind. And so our activity for today, I want you to take out your kids' core kit, your box that looks like this, and inside you should find a bandana. Everyone has a different color. So it's like a big square of fabric. And what I want you to do for your activity is to make a blindfold out of that bandana, out of that piece of fabric. And that's to represent one of the plagues, which was the darkness, right? The sun never came up, and it was really hard for people to see where they were going. And so we're going to be using this later. You can tie it right around your eyes so that you can't see, but don't do it quite yet. First, you need to set up an obstacle course. And so what that can look like, I set one up in my backyard and I was out there playing with my dog, and I used some stools and some benches and some chairs and some old pieces of wood and some balls that we had just laying around the house, and set up an obstacle course for us to go through. And some of the things we had to go around, some of the things we had to go under, some we had to go over, and some we had to go through. And some of the things with the balls, we had to do different tricks to get the ball from one place to another by throwing it or kicking it or jumping over it. And so there's all kinds of things you can do outside. If you don't have a good like soft grass space, you could always use a sidewalk or a driveway and use the chalk that's in your core kit. And you could write out some of the instructions like jump over this line or skip across these circles. And you can make an obstacle course that way on a sidewalk or a driveway. And if you don't have a safe outside space, that's totally fine. You can ask a grown-up and you can make a obstacle course inside too. You could use couches or tables or anything to go under and over and around and through. You could put obstacles out on the floor of like your own toys, things that you have to move around. You could even build a mini obstacle course using something like Legos that you would maybe have like a minifig go through the obstacle course. So there's all kinds of ways that you can set up the course. But once you have it set up, then that's where you'll take your blindfold. So there's kind of some different challenges that you can do. You could do the course blindfolded with a buddy. And so if you do that, then you would do it blindfolded. You would put your blindfold on, and then your buddy would help guide you through the course using their voice, just the same way that we listen to God's voice when we can't quite see where we're supposed to be going or what's up ahead. We listen to God to speak to us in different ways. So in this story, Moses had big expectations of God freeing his people, the Israelites, from slavery in Egypt. But God's response wasn't exactly what the Israelites were anticipating. They were kind of hoping that God would just change Pharaoh's mind right away, but they had to go through the plagues too. And so going through this obstacle course is a little bit like going through the plagues and thinking about some of those challenges that both the Israelites and the Egyptians would have been facing. And throughout this story, we know Pharaoh keeps saying, no, no, no. But little by little, I think with each of the plagues, Pharaoh's control over the Israelites starts to unravel just a little bit each time until at the end, when children are dying, he realizes that it is not worth it to keep the Israelites as his slaves, that it would be much better if they and their God just left Egypt and weren't around anymore. So he allows them to go. And we know also from our Bible that they go across the Red Sea and God makes dry land for them to walk on in order to escape. So once you have your obstacle course set up, you can blindfold yourself. You can have your buddy guide you with her voice. You could do it unblindfolded too if you want to do it that way. You could even do it one time and then see if you can make yourself even faster. So there's lots and lots of options of things that you can do. You could even challenge your friends or family members to a race. You could have multiple people going through at the same time and seeing who goes faster, or just time each other and see who has the fastest time. And you could do those blindfolded or unblindfolded. You could even do your obstacle course backwards, start at the ends and go back the other way, or you can rearrange the whole thing and do it another time and reset up some of the different stations. So there's lots and lots of ways that you can think about this activity. About when you think about it, I want you to think about those plagues and some of the challenges that the Israelites faced and the ways that they continued to persevere and to trust that God had a plan for helping them be able to leave Pharaoh's rule and be able to leave Egypt. So yeah, that's our activity for today. And then once you're done with your activity, I want you to continue with our Faith 5. So you'll share your highs and lows. It could be about the obstacle course, or it could be about anything from this day or this week. And then after you share highs and lows, I want you to talk a little bit more about the story and the activity, some things that you learned, some things that you noticed, maybe some questions that you have. And then after that, you'll pray together, and you can pray to thank God for the ways that God works through the challenges in our lives, that God is always there with us, just like God is always there with the Israelites, even when times were looking pretty tough and they might not have felt like there was a lot of hope for change and for a better future. And then you can bless each other. So to do that, you'll mark yourself with the sign of the cross and mark whoever's with you, whether a grown-up or a friend or a sibling, with the sign of the cross on their forehead, and remind each other that you're blessed and loved children of God. So that's our Faith 5 for this week for your faith at home with your summer core kits. And you can go ahead and finish up the video now and do the rest of your Faith 5 at home. And if you're here live, then we'll finish with our highs and lows in just a minute.